So here we're looking at a couple typical species of softwoods or needle-leaf trees that you'd find in the northern forest, and we're going to look at some easy ways to discern an eastern hemlock from some of the other guys that you'll find around. So we're looking at a hemlock right here, and the first one we're going to compare it to is Pinistrobus, white pine. And with the white pine, you'll notice that the needles are close to 4 or 5 inches long, and they come in clusters of 5, distinctly different from the hemlock, which are much shorter, and the leaves are actually flat. So that's an easy one. The next one is Tsuga occidentalis, which is in eastern white cedar, which isn't really a cedar at all, but we call it cedar. This does have flat leaves like the hemlock, but they're almost in a scale-like formation. If you look real close, they almost resemble the scales of a fish. And they grow in almost like compound leaves and clusters on the branches, as opposed to the hemlock, where each of the leaves are found individually on the branches.
Nick Norheim to the office, please.
This is Picea rubens, red spruce. This one's semi-similar in terms of the leaf length. They're both fairly short, less than an inch long. But the easiest way that you can tell this guy from the hemlock is if you pick the needles up and you can roll them in your fingers, and they will roll. They're almost 3-sided. If you try that with a hemlock leaf, it will not roll in your fingers because it's flat. So that's the easiest way to tell the difference between Tsuga canadensis and Picea rubens. Finally, we have Abies balsamea, the balsam fir, and this guy really does look similar, especially if you look at him up close. This is the top of the leaves. The color is fairly similar. The leaf structure is similar. There's a couple differences. One, the leaves on the balsam fir tend to radiate out from the branch in multiple directions. As you spin it, you can see. Whereas in the hemlock, they sit flat. They're really all in one plane. And it's almost like your hand is laid out flat. And if you flip the balsam fir over and you look real close, you can see 2 white stripes underneath each of the needles. And the hemlock actually has a similar look to it, white underneath, and it actually has a couple white stripes that are probably hard to see on the camera. But the big difference is that the leaves on the hemlock are much shorter. They're about half the length of these guys right here on the balsam fir. So you've got the radiating leaves and then the leaf length. The bark looks distinctly different, but in terms of just looking at the leaves on the trees, that's probably the easiest way to tell the difference if you're out in the northern forest and you want to know if you've actually found a hemlock tree.
Hey everybody, Maxfield English, and we're up in northern Vermont, Lamoille County, and we're standing in a typical northern hardwood forest. This area is predominated mostly by sugar maple, Acer saccharum, and it's fairly spaced. It's been harvested over the years. The last commercial harvest was probably about 40 or 50 years ago. So we've got a lot of regeneration, some of the older trees providing seed for that. So I'm going to give you a quick look around at what's typical of this area. So we can see the typical things we'd see in a northern hardwood forest. A particular note is looking up at the canopy here. just spin you around. This is about a 60% canopy cover, and that's typical for a northern hardwood forest, contributed in large part by things like deadfall, like this guy right here. And this guy was a victim of deadfall, being pulled down by another tree. You can see at the base in the pile of trees that probably fell over maybe within the last 9 to 12 months. And then down the hill there is the root ball of a wind throw, and that was a victim of one of the stronger storms that came through the area. So we're going to head up the hill and over the ridge a little bit, and I'm going to show you the real reason why we're out here. Is actually one of my favorite trees in the northern forest, and it is not a hardwood. But I just want you to remember what you're seeing here, that 60% canopy cover, and even at this late time of day, it's still letting a fair amount of light in. The sun's actually probably down on the horizon at this point, and I can still see perfectly well, but where we're headed, it might be questionable, so we'll see how well the camera does, but let's take a walk up in the woods here. So here we are in a hemlock stand, one of Vermont's described natural communities in wetland, woodland, wildland, and it's typified by being almost all hemlock trees. There's a lot of stands that have mixes in them, but hemlock stands, they come in small patches, whereas a lot of other trees will have a lot of other species growing with them, but a true hemlock stand is really just hemlock trees. And one of the main reasons is that these guys are so shade tolerant. They're considered to be the most shade tolerant tree, with sugar maples, American beech, and balsam fir pretty close behind. Before European settlement, they comprised about 10% of the forest canopy cover, and by about 1900, that number was less than 5%, and it remains about the same place today. The main reason was that the bark of the trees was used for the tanning process, and it's since been replaced by chemicals, but the trees just haven't seemed to really rebounded, mainly because they're very specific in their location, and they require certain atmospheric and soil conditions to really thrive. And this, luckily for us, happens to be one of them. So let's take a look around and see what you can see here. So looking around at the forest floor, probably the first difference you'll notice in the hardwood stand that we were in earlier is that there's really very little regeneration here. I'm looking at pretty much all ferns. We've got one small American beech here, Fagus grandifolia, and other than that, it looks like ferns. We'll take a look. We might be able to find false Solomon seal scattered about. Wood sorrel. This guy right here, this is pretty typical in a hemlock forest. These guys are real shade tolerant as well, and of course you're going to have various fungus growing. All these guys like kind of a cool, damp soil, as does the hemlock tree. And you can kind of dig your fingers into the soil here, and you can immediately feel the humus that's kind of holding the moisture in there. This is really important for their regeneration. hemlocks are highly susceptible to desiccation, and so through a lot of studies, they've figured out that even 6 hours of drying time in an area where they're not likely to see moisture can actually neutralize the seeds and even the seedlings to the point where they die. They're not even going to thrive at all. So let's take a walk over in another section, and we'll take a look at some other things. So we're standing in the hemlock stand, and sun's starting to set. Kind of quiet and nice in here. Feels pretty cool. Sounds really muffled. But let's take a look up. And I think it's pretty clear versus the hardwood site that we've got maybe 10 to 15% canopy exposure here versus 40% sunlight coming through in the hardwood stand, whereas we've maybe got 80-85% here, and so this is letting very little light down to the forest floor. That's really contributing to the lack of regeneration of any other species, really. And here we have, right over here, tree that's seemed to be fighting. Luckily it's on the edge, and I think that's the main reason it's here. This is actually red spruce, which is somewhat shade tolerant, not as much as the hemlock, but this guy's getting pretty good afternoon sunlight, and so that's probably why he's here. But he's certainly short and stunted, and really I wouldn't consider it a healthy tree. So let's see if we can find a hemlock sapling. So we're just on the edge of the hemlock forest. That blackness you can see there is the edge of it. When we walk through, it's, I don't know, about 150 meters long and maybe 100 meters wide. It kind of sits in a little alpine valley of a pocket in between two ridges. And we just walked out to the edge here, and this massive guy, probably about 22 inches diameter breast height, that's a typical hemlock, looking rather stately. And then over here, it's probably tough to see, but I'm standing in front of a pretty good patch of maybe 5-6 year old balsam fir, Abies balsamea, and these guys have been browsed very, very heavily. Pretty much every single one of these saplings that's here in this little cluster has the top has been eaten completely off, and as we move over here, we can see it's continued. And even on the other side, this whole patch has been browsed right down, and that's from a friend, the white-tailed deer. And my suspicions were that they were the cause of what I wanted to show you but was unable to in the hemlock stand, was hemlock saplings. And I walked through and I counted a few spruce here and there, but there wasn't a single hemlock sapling. Late in the day, it's possible that I didn't see them, but I looked pretty hard. And that brings up the point I wanted to mention earlier, is that eastern hemlock is considered 7th on the browse list for deer. And it vacillates depending on the region, the snow cover. There's a lot of factors, and so my guess is that these guys kind of bumped the hemlock saplings up on their list of preference a little bit higher than number 7, and they probably browsed that area completely out. The other thing is that this is a map deer wintering yard, and crucial to whitetail survival in the winter. They've done studies on the snowpack underneath hemlock stands in the middle of winter when there's feet of snow on the ground, and it's 50-60% less snow cover underneath the hemlocks. The snow lands on the branches and is sublimated right back up into the atmosphere, and so the deer have a lot easier time moving around under the hemlocks, and so they tend to stay in that area when the snow pack is deep, and so they'll also tend to browse where they are bedding down, and this helps them get through the winter. But of course, on the flip side, it's not great for hemlock regeneration, which looks like they're going to need a little bit of a herd management on the white-tailed deer if this hemlock stand is going to continue, because once these guys pass on, the regeneration is going to move probably toward American beech and spruce, based on the saplings that I did see on the edge and in the interior. So let's take a walk and see if we can get out of the woods before it gets too dark and we can't see where we're going.